Hello and welcome to Beginners Python and Machine Learning. My name's Tim Cummings. Today we are going to be looking at IDEs. In particular, I'll be looking at PyCharm, the Community Edition, and how they make programming easier. I'll also have a bit of a look at Visual Studio Code for some people who are using Visual Studio Code and don't want to have to install PyCharm Community Edition. We're going to be using Python. I'm using 3.9, so you can download 3.9.5 from python.org. The stuff we're doing today will actually work with earlier versions back to 3.7 if you're using that. If you want PyCharm, you can get it from jetbrains.com, and there's a free version and a professional version, and so it's under developer tools is PyCharm, and we're going to be using the community edition, which is free to use. So you can click on download, and this is the community one here, and that's still a really powerful integrated development environment. Okay, when you're installing Python, one of the things I recommend is to click, there's a little option here to add it to the path. This is an old one. This is when I was doing Python 3.6, but still there for Python 3.9. That just makes it a bit easier if you're doing any stuff from the command line, and then Python will be available to you. You can set it up later, but it's a lot more fiddly to add it to the path later than if you just tick the box when you're installing it. All right. So what we're going to do, I've created a file here which has got a few errors in it and a few things that could be improved, and we're going to load that into PyCharm and also do it with Visual Studio Code, and we're going to use the tools that are available in PyCharm to improve it. I've also given you a solution file here, and so that's that will have all the solution, all the fixes put in it afterwards, from afterwards. But anyway, we'll just download this one for now. This is from our GitHub site. All the session summaries go up to GitHub. I actually put this just on my private one and in a branch, but by the time, and that's probably all that's live at the moment, but eventually that'll get merged into the master on Aniquasar, github.com. So, and that'll be the link that's in this file, and you'll see that. So, download this file. I'll click on that, so it's brought it up into a new window because it's just a text file, and so I'm going to save that file into my downloads folder, and that's in the downloads folder now. Show in folder. And so I've created a Visual Studio Code project for this, so I'll go and push that into there. I'll just cut Visual Studio Code projects, meetup 107, and paste. And so we'll use that. I haven't actually created a project yet in PyCharm, so let's do that first. So I'll start up PyCharm. I'm using version 21.1, and we'll create a new project. So I'm going to call the project Meetup 107. And one of the things I really like about PyCharm is it strongly encourages the use of virtual environments. Now, virtual environments mean that you can work on different projects, and libraries that you've installed for one project don't interfere with libraries installed for another project. So each one gets their own virtual environment. Now, you can put this virtual environment just in a folder like venv is the standard place to put it, and we can just put it in our own project folder. If you're using Anaconda, then use a Conda environment. If you're using Python from python.org, use a virtualenv environment. You can use pipenv. I don't have a lot of experience with pipenv. I think that's just going to be more beneficial to people who use the command line a lot and want to use it use the same virtual environment manager in PyCharm that they're used to using on the command line. Now, if you've got any questions while we're going through this, feel free to ask them on Slack in the Learning to Code. I see Leo's just said the audio is a little low, so I'll try to talk up a bit. Or you can try using YouTube chat. If someone notices something on YouTube chat that I haven't seen, and they can just bring it up on the Slack channel, that'd be good as well. Okay. So let's create this this project. Now it creates that virtual environment using those settings that we've set, and that'll take a while. You can see some of the things that it's doing. It's indexing down here on the bottom right. When you create a virtual environment, some of the tools that Python installs by default are actually out of date, so PyCharm goes through and updates those for us, so that's good. Okay, so here's a dummy project that it's set up for us, and it tells us how to run the project. It's just got main.py. Press Shift F10 to execute it or replace it with your code. Now they've changed these keys on Macs recently, but I think Mac now uses the same as Windows keystrokes. So I just did Shift F10 and it ran it down here in a window. It says that's the command it used to start up the file, and this is the what it did. It printed hi PyCharm and finished. And it tells us here how to do debugging and breakpoints, but we'll do them later. Okay, so what I might do, I might keep hold of this main.py, and that's where I'll put all the code. And so let's go grab that code for PyCharm. So I'll copy this one here, and I'll put it into my PyCharm projects, meetup 107, next to main. Okay, and I'll keep that as an original of what we started off with, and then we can compare the two at the end to see what changes we've made. Alright, so that's there, and I'll put that link into Slack in case Leo's having trouble finding the link. If I can find the link myself. Alright, so let's go back to PyCharm. Now what we have here, over here we've got a project tab, and that by clicking on that tab you can hide or show this project view, which shows us all the files. Now you'll see the venv directory here. Don't ever change anything inside that manually. That's a virtual environment, and you'll want to, if you do want to make changes to that, you use the tools to do that. Where did you save the Py file? Okay, so when I created the project, you can see the path to the project here. It's by default it goes into PyCharm projects, which is in my home directory. So my home user is Pytho in users, so C:\users /Pytho /PyCharm projects, and then meetup 107. So if we look in Windows, this is my Windows project. You see it's meetup 107. And it's there's PyCharm projects is where most of them will go by default, but they don't have to. You can have your PyCharm projects in other folders, but by default it's easy to put them in PyCharm projects there in your home folder. And it also there's a few security constraints if you use the documents folder. Microsoft and I think Apple are doing that too. They're putting these extra security constraints on documents, so sometimes it's easier to run these things outside of documents, and then they can do your programs that have more flexibility. All right. So we can double click on any file here and we'll bring it up on the right hand side, or we can just select from these tabs and we can close them here. So I'm going to close this one for now, so we'll just work in main.py, and down the bottom we can see the results of when we run the code, and there's also some other tabs here that we'll go through as time goes on. Alright, so I've put down the steps that we're going to go through. We've created a new project, created a new virtual environment, we've added this file to the project, and now the first step here is to fix the compile errors which prevent running. So if you look up on the top right hand corner, you'll see we've got a whole bunch of problems. Some of them are classed as errors, some of them are warnings, some of them are weak warnings, and some of them are just spelling mistakes. So if we click on that, it shows up the problems tab down the bottom here, and so we can go through these and solve them. Now the errors, we can't, while there's an errors there, we can't even run the code. We can try to run it, but it won't. Well, let's see what happens when we try to run it. I'll try to run it and it throws up an error, and so it doesn't get anywhere. So we have to fix them. They're like compile errors, and we have to fix them first before we can even get the code running. But fortunately PyCharm shows us where they are, so let's work through those and fix them. You'll also notice down the right hand side here we've got some red markers that also shows where the errors are, and in fact you can hover over the marker and it will show what the code is at that point, what the problem is. But we can just click down here and that'll take us to the problem. So here's one, PyFiglet. Now this is a third-party library. I don't think it's installed even in Anaconda. It's definitely not installed in standard Python, so we have to install it. So let's one way we can install it, we can do it from the terminal. Now if I go to terminal, you see it brings up the command line, and at the beginning of the command line in this command line prompt, it's got the name of our virtual environment, which is venv, in parentheses. So if you don't have it there in parentheses, then you haven't activated your virtual environment, and it should be automatic, but if it's not, then you would activate that one and it's different on different computers. So I'll do it in Visual Studio Code, because I don't think it is even activated there. Actually, alright, so while I'm here, we'll install PyFiglet. So it's pip install PyFiglet. Okay, so that's now installed, and we'll see if we go up here, eventually that error will go away once there we go. PyCharm's recognized that PyFiglet's now been installed, and so that error has gone away. Now let's try going over to Visual Studio Code. So I've created a folder called Meetup 107 in my Visual Studio Code projects, and I've copied this file. I'll just make changes straight to this file, I think. Let's see, Python extension. So it's worked out that this is a Python file because it ends in .py, and it tells us all about the Python extension. Okay, so let's open up a terminal window, and that's done a bash window. let's try, I mean, I like bash as my favorite, but let's go for command prompt. Okay, so this one doesn't have the virtual environment activated. As you can see, there's nothing at the front there. So things that we can do and I'm not an expert on Visual Studio Code, so just correct me if I make a mistake, but if I do Control-Shift-P, I can bring up this, I can't remember what it's called, but it brings up this where you can enter commands, and one of them, very common, is select your interpreter. And we're going to enter the interpreter path and find it. And I think we actually have to create the virtual environment ourselves. Okay, so let's do this manually. I'll just see what version of Python we're using. 3.9.5, so that's right. So we'll use the venv module in Python, and we'll create our module, our virtual environment, and once again we'll call it venv. And you can see that's created a folder here called venv, and it's putting all the files in that so that we can run our environment. And now we have to activate it, and so to do that we scripts is what it's called on Windows. On Mac it's called, and Linux it's called bin for the binaries, and we want activate.bat. So if you're doing this on a Mac, you would use the word source at the beginning, and like that. So Mac or Linux, you go source, you do venv / rather than backslash bin / activate. But here we can just run that, and you can see now we've got the brackets at the front and we've created it. So now I can select that interpreter, Control-Shift-P, and find it. It's in here, in, who knows, I think it's in site packages. No. There we go. I don't even know where it is. So we can, let's try our bash window, because I know some bash commands a bit better. So this uses the scripts, the other format, activate. There we go, that's active. And then we can say which Python. And it's in scripts Python. Okay, that's where I would have thought. There it is. Yep. Okay, so that's now running, and we can also do our install pyfidlet. That's installed, and to run it we can run here. That's run in a bash one, and it's give us the next compile error. But anyway, for those using Visual Studio Code, that should get you started. Remember, you can ask any questions on those chat channels, YouTube chat or Slack channel. Okay, so Howard, did I answer your question about where to save the PY file? All right. Okay, so the next one in our list of problems is the unexpected indent. And what I've done there, this is a really hard one to see. If you look at Visual Studio Code, in fact, oh yeah, it's marked the problem with these little. Is what I've done is I've used spaces for my indentation all the way up to here, and there I've used a tab, and then I've used spaces. Now, just using a normal text editor, really hard to see that sort of thing, but an IDE that knows about Python really flags that up. So I can fix that if I press backspace and then I press the tab key. That'll actually put 4 spaces in. So you can see there's 4 spaces there now, and that'll fix that problem. Okay, let's work through these. Remember to ask any questions if you have any. Okay, if not pathlib. Okay, so I've used a reference to the pathlib library, but I haven't imported it. So I just need to go and import that. And I'll do that up here. And that error disappeared. So I like to put my import statements which come from the standard Python at the top, and then any third-party libraries I put them at the bottom. Okay, decimal, that's from the decimal library, which is also in the standard Python, so I need to import that one. Now you can see I've come down to line 150, and I've somehow got to get back to where I was doing the import statements. Now, in this navigate menu, there's a back, and that'll take me back to where I was, which is really good if you're writing code in 2 bits in a big file. You can quickly jump backwards and forwards between those 2 places, and rather than just scroll up and down through lots of code. So the decimal library, we're going to import the decimal class, and already we've cleared up 2 of those errors that were there. Okay, so the install command was not recognized in terminal. And so Howard, are you using PyCharm, or are you using the Visual Studio Code? Okay, the next one, positional argument after a keyword argument. So this is a requirement when you're calling functions in Python, is that if you use keyword arguments like I've done here, string action equals payment due, then every other one after that also has to be a keyword argument. But we've just used positional arguments without the names, and so it's relying on the position that they're in, even though the positions are right. So I could fix this just by making them all positional arguments, and I can do that by taking out the name of this keyword. Okay, it's already it's all fixed all our errors, and so now we can run it. Okay, so Howard's running PyCharm. I presume on Windows. He went into the terminal and he tried to run pip install pyfiglet. And it didn't work. So as long as you have the virtual environment selected here and active, then this should work. Now, reasons that this might not work is if you didn't have Python installed on your computer to start with. Leo's made a very good suggestion, is to use the GUI to install it. So you can go into File Settings, and in Settings you'll find your project here, and that's where you can set your Python interpreter and make sure that that's okay, and then that'll show what's installed in the virtual environment. So if you can select it here, you can run it, you can install it. So yeah, you could press plus there, you can type in PyFiglet there and just click install package from there. All right, and that's normally the way, well, the way I normally tell people to install these is using a requirements.txt file. So we don't yet have a requirements.txt file, as you can see, because it would be showing up here right next to our Python files. But what I've done in our code is to create a requirements.txt file by running the code, and so that's what these 3 lines will do. And so once we've got a requirements.txt file, then we can put things into it. Okay, oh good. So Howard solved the problem by remembering to type pip before install. Okay, so now we've fixed up all of the compile errors, we can run the code and see if we've got any logic errors or other runtime errors that are going to happen. So remember, we ran it before using Shift F10. So we can also, and Shift F10 is currently up here as run for main. We can also click run, and we can choose which of our open files we want to run. We've only got one open, so main is the one. So let's run that one. And we've got some more errors. So this is an index out of range error. Okay, but you'll notice we've created a requirements.txt file, and that'll be an empty file. Let's have a look at it. Yep, add your third-party libraries here. So that's a line I wrote into it, and so that file now exists. Okay, one thing I really like about this these IDEs is when you get an error like this, you actually get clickable links. So this tells me the error happened in the file main.py, and it tells me the line number 113, and I can actually click on that link and it takes me to line 113 and said this is where the error happened. That's right. I'm seeing that I've got an error in line 113. It says it's something to do with an index, but I've used indexes twice here. Could be numbers right, could be wrong, could be tens left. And I've got a logging statement up here with a debug. So we're not seeing it because our logging level by default is warning. So maybe I should turn on some logging. Now the way I want to do that, I've put some code in here using the argparse library from Python, which means it'll parse any command line arguments that you pass through to this script when you run it. And the argument that it's going to look for is --log, and the options that I've given it are debug, info, warning, error, and critical. So I want to run this main.py but give it an argument. Now fortunately in PyCharm I can edit my configurations. So here's the configuration. It's running the script, which is main.py, and here I can put parameters, which are the command line arguments. So I can say -log, I want to be debug, and click OK. So now every time I run it, I will get extra logging because I've put these lines at the front here, which will parse the arguments, and they'll look for one of those levels and set the that level in the logging basic config. And we can see now that I've done that, when I look at the results, I get these debug logging, which always comes out in red, and it tells me that left had the value 40, and conjunction was and, S was 300. So it gives me a bit of information about what was happening at that point in the program. Now I could sit there and try to work out what the value of all the variables were at that time, and but I think I might use the debug facility that's available in these IDEs. So the way they work is you can set a breakpoint, and even the default code that got created when we created the project had a breakpoint in it. Now let's put the breakpoint here on line 113, which is where we're getting the error message. So now when I run it, I was running it using the run symbol here, which is the green triangle, but I could run it using the green bug to debug it. And this is not to be confused with debug for logging. That's just a logging level which we've turned on. But this debug invokes a debugger inside PyCharm that allows us to step through code and looks at values of variables as it's running. So it's very powerful. So if I click on that debug button, the code is run all the way up to line 113, and it's stopped at line 113. Now I've just got a Windows Defender firewall up here, so I better allow access on that one so that it can, because the debugger uses network sockets to communicate with the code as it's running. Okay, so we've stopped at the code here. This tells me all the variables that are currently in scope. So it tells me what conjunction is, what count is, what left is. So left was 40. It tells me what name was 100. Number is 45. Power is 100. Okay. And these are all the variables that are available inside that are local to the function that I'm currently in. Now there are some variables that are also in the main module. And I can click over here as a bit of a call stack that shows the main module is what we ran, and it called this function called number name, and that's where we currently are, and these are the local variables to number name. So if I click on module, it now shows me all the global variables that are available to module. So I can click on either of those to see the values of those variables. Another thing I can do, at the moment I've got the show the watches in the variables tab, which is this tab here. If I click on these pair of glasses here and say there are some things that I really want to look at all the time. So tens is one that I want to look at all the time. And now I can switch back to the number name function, and I can see that left had a value of 40, and tens was a list that had 8 items in it. So I can see that my index is going to be out of range, and that's why we're getting the error. So to fix this, and feel free to fix these as you go, and as you're working on this file, you'll see other things that I haven't got to yet, but you can try fixing them as well. So here's tens. It's a bit wide to see. Oh, you can see as it's been running through, on the right here it's put this stuff in italics, and it's telling me what the value of the result of this command is. So by running this command, it's set tens to this list, which in this case just looks exactly the same. But that's useful in other things where there's arithmetic going on or something like that. All right, I'm going to hide the project tab, so I've got more room to work. Okay, now I want to change this list to a dictionary, because if you remember back from when we introduced this function, we used we use dictionary, and then we could use an index that was represented the numbers of these names. So I could use 20 for the index for 20, 30, 40, 50. Okay. So one thing I really like in PyCharm, if I want to change this left square bracket to a left curly bracket, I just I select it and type the left curly bracket, and it automatically changed the right square bracket to a right curly bracket. So that was really good. Unfortunately, that doesn't solve all my problems because it's changed it from a list to a set, and now I've got to put in a bit of code to make it a dictionary. Okay. So that's run. Now I've changed the code, so but any code changes I make are not going to be seen by the debugger. I have to actually stop the code and rerun it for the debugger to see the new changes that I've made. So where are we? We're currently here, and if I press the play button to keep going, it's going to throw an error. If I look on the console, it hasn't got to the error yet. I'll press play one more time, resume program, and that's now hit the error. And I've got this little lightning bolt saying there's been an exception, has been thrown, and we're almost stopped. And if I press yep, well that's the end. It sort of holds on to it for a little bit so you can still see the names of these variables, but I'm going to press stop to stop it, and it's finished with an exit code now of -1. Okay. So this is pretty interesting. I'm going to take out the breakpoints that we've put in here, but let's have a look at how this number name function works. So I'm going to put in, let's just put a breakpoint in there. So if anyone ever calls number name function, the program's going to stop if I've started it in the debug way. If I start it with the play way, it'll just keep running straight through. Okay, so let's play this one. So we're in number name. We've been passed in the number 345, and let's just watch how the program goes through the logic to work out how to convert these 3 digits, 3, 4, and 5, to the name 345. And the way we do it, we use these single stepping items. We can step over a line of code, which means just run the line of code and go to the next line on the page that you're on. We can step into the line of code, which means if the line of code you're running calls a function, it will then jump to that function that it's calling, even if it's one of the Python functions. So sometimes it's useful just to use this one, which is step into my code. So if it's a Python function, it's not part of my code, it won't step into it. It only steps in when it's using my code. So this is the one I would probably use the most, step into my code. So let's run. Okay, so I've run one step there. I can see S has now been defined as a string, and it's just an empty string. And we're sitting on the beginning of this loop, and we're about to use powers, which you remember is here. I'll just push this across. So powers has got these numbers and their names. So we're going to be using that. Okay, I'll go back to number name. Okay, I'll step over. So I don't need to go into the items function. I know what that does. Okay, it's set the value for power to be 1 trillion and the name to be 1 trillion. And actually that's probably, yep, that's 1 trillion. And then it's ready to run this command here. And you can see the variables that have changed have gone blue. So in that last line we ran, 2 variables got changed, the values of them. There's name and power. And now if I jump across the next one, now everything is gone back to this pink color, and count has gone to blue because that's the one that's just changed. So count was equal to 345 divided by 1 trillion, and that's not greater than 0, so it's not going to run anything in this conditional statement. So if I step, no, it's gone to the end of the loop, realize the indentation's finished here, so it's jumped back up to the loop, and it's going to set new values for power and name. So power and name have now got 1 billion, and really it's just trying to get down to 100. So I can quickly just go through, count's still 0, so it's not going to do anything. So we're going to try power and name of 1 million. Count is still 0. Power and name of 1,000. Count is still 0. Power and name of 100. So now we've got count equals 3. So we're going to be jumping into this conditional statement. So if I jump here, the first thing it's doing is going to find out, it wants to convert count, which is the digit 3, into a name, which is going to be THREE, and then after that it's going to put the name of the power that we're currently up to, which is 100. And you see how I hover over these things, it shows me what the values are. So that's useful. I can also look up here, I can see count is 3, name equals 100. But this number name, that's a function. We're about to call a function. So I'm going to step into that, step into my code. I could do either of these two. And it stepped into the same function. If you remember, number name is a recursive function, so it's actually calling itself. And if you look down in our call stack, you can see our main module has called number name, which has called number name itself. And I can look at our original number name was called with the number 345, and this number name was called with the number 3. So number 3, that's going to be pretty easy for it to work through. It's going to go through all of these powers.items, and it should get to not use any of those because the number 3 is less than 100, which is the smallest one in powers. So to make it a bit quicker, I can just set another breakpoint there and say run to that breakpoint, and then turn that breakpoint off. And let's see how we go. So S got nothing out of this first section of code because it's such a small number. So it's just going to jump through. Conjunction is going to be set to an empty string. It's going to calculate right to be the value 3. You see in blue there. And left is going to be 3 minus 3, which is just 0. We'll just debug, send some data to the console, and I can look at the console to have a look at that. There's the console. S is 0, S is blank, conjunction is blank, and left is 0. And now it's going to work out which one of these it's going to return, and it'll be this one. It'll just look up the numbers array to find the word for 3. So let's see if it does that. Doesn't. The first one's false. The second one is true, and yep, it's gone into return. So if I keep going, even if I do step into on that one, it's going to step out because there was nothing left to step into. In fact, it had finished itself. So it returns back to here, and once I go over that step, we can see that S is now 300. So it's calculated the 300, and now it's got to work out the 45. So number, it subtracted 300 from 345 and left it with 45, and it's going to keep working through this to work out how to display 45. Didn't need anything more up here because that's all for above 100. We have got something, so it's going to work out to put the word and in there. Now it's going to split up our number. On the right we've got a 5, on the left we've got 40. Number is less than length of numbers. That's not correct. Right is 0. That's not correct. So else. We jump down to the else condition, which is to, we can see if I hover over these, S is going to be 300, conjunction is going to be and, if it hovers eventually, and then left is going to be 40, and right is going to be 5. So that printed something. Let's go look at our console, see what printed. 345. We can see we've got a bug in our code because there's no space between the and the 45. And so I've put an assert in here, which is how you run your tests. So if I run over that, and assert's going to, I'm just going to quickly jump out because it's, there we go, it's calculated all that. And here we see we've got an error. And in the console, we haven't got anything on the console yet, so I'll step over. And there's our assertion error. Yep. So it knows, it's worked out that it's missing the space there. So we've got to fix that space, otherwise we're going to keep stopping our code at this assertion. All right. Now, I recommend playing with this, the debug in this function, especially for big numbers, and you can see how it just keeps calling itself and creating that call stack quite a long way. And it's really gives you insight into how this function works. All right, I'll put the space in there to fix that. And let's try running. So I'll just run it straight now using that. That's right. So we got number name for 345 gave us 345, and it also worked for 12,345,040,302, and that passed all the assertions. Okay, well that's good. We got all the way down to here, and we got some more attribute errors. But why don't we work through the errors that we're currently seeing in the code? All right, line too long. So PEP8 has got which is the guidelines on how to write code. They're saying we shouldn't go over 120 characters. And if you look here, we just do that. So maybe if we bring that in, that'll fix that error, and you see the error's gone from here. I've listed here all the errors and warnings that you'll see. So for example, number 5, unused import statement, and I've just marked them in the code so you can see what the error is if you haven't got PyCharm. But we've got PyCharm. It's showing us this stuff. It's worked out that we haven't used the math library anywhere in our code, so it's just put it in grey. So that stands out quite well, and we can just delete that line because we don't need it, and that'll get rid of that error. So let's have a look at PyFiglet. That's the one that we thought we'd fixed before by installing it, but now we're getting an error saying that it's not listed in our project requirements, and that's true, we didn't put it in the requirements. So that's a bit of a savior for us, because we didn't install it using requirements. We might forget that if we move this to another machine that we need to install it. So if I hover over it, it gives us, it tells us what we have to do. We have to add imported packages to requirements, and I can actually just click on that and it will do it for us. And it'll put it into requirements. I can even specify that I don't want to specify a version, or I can specify an exact version or a compatible version or a greater than or equal. So let's just go greater than or equal. Compatible actually was quite good. Let's try with that. And there you go, automatically typed into our requirements.txt file, pyfiglet tilde equals 0.8.post1. And then that's gone away. Okay, what other warnings am I getting? We've got a couple up here, a couple of spelling mistakes. So I can hover over that, replace with spelling. That looks good. I'll use that. And our BPAML, that's our abbreviation for Beginners Python and Machine Learning. So I'm not going to add that one to the dictionary rather than replace it with something else. So I'm going to save it to our dictionary, and that way I can use BPAML elsewhere in my code and it won't trigger as a spelling mistake. Alright, let's go down to problems, see what the next one is. Oh, code is unreachable, line 113. Well, that's true. We've got an if statement here, and every part of the if statement, every else if, every else, they've all got return statements. So there's no way that our code will ever get to here. So we should delete that line. It's really never going to be run. Okay. Redeclared num defined without usage. So that's a weak warning. Maybe we'll do the strong warnings first. Number to text being replaced by number name. Okay, so this function here, number to text, was one I thought, well, you know, we were using it. Let's have a look at what it output. In the run, number to text for 345, it just converted each digit, so 345, while number name for 345 gave us the full name, 345. So we might decide that we're going to replace this function with this one, but we don't know if anyone's still using this old function. So what we do is I put a warning in there to say it's been replaced by another function called number name, and this deprecation warning. And that way PyCharm can see whenever we've used number to text, it puts a line through it and gives us this message here, number to text has been replaced by number name. So there we go, and we're already using number name in the next line, so we can just delete that line. Let's try Control/. In fact, I'll just delete it. Okay, and now we're up to this one. Redefine num without usage. So here PyCharm's worked out that this is probably not a thing that we would do in code. We wouldn't store a value into a variable and then immediately store another value into the variable. We're obviously meant to do something else. And what we meant to do was print the value of that. I'm just going to change these. That'll do. Okay, so now I've used this value of num and the error message has gone away. The warning, it's just a warning really, but it's likely that I've done something wrong and it was correct. Okay, let's have a look at this next one. We expected a type float, but we got complex instead. So I've got this function here that takes a Celsius and runs. Now this function will work if I send it an integer or a float, or in this case I've sent a complex number. And so it's warned me. It was expecting a float but got complex instead. And the reason it knows that is because I've used Python typing on this. So Python typing is a new feature in Python that works very well with IDEs. And so I say that I'm taking in Celsius as a variable, an argument, and I expect people to provide me with a float for this case, and the return value from this function is going to be a float. So if anything else gets tried to be sent to me, it'll still work, but it'll flag a warning in the IDE, and the programmer can look at that and go, oh, actually that's not what I want. So say for example, he thought he wanted to convert the absolute value of that complex number an absolute will return a float, convert a complex into a float, and then that's what we actually want to send to convert to Fahrenheit. Not that that makes any sense either, but at least it's better than what we were doing. Okay. Unexpected type. Item, possible types, supports index, slice. Well, that's interesting because I thought that that looks all right. So I'm just going to leave that like that for the moment. All right. This one here, unresolved attribute reference, original invoice. So Python's gone through my code and it's looked at when I create an invoice. So invoice is this class that I've got that inherits from document, and it doesn't actually set any values in the init from invoice, but in document, which it inherits from, it sets these values here. So these are all attributes that we can use, but it's worked out that original invoice is not one of them. Now, original invoice is something that we're using when we're creating a credit note or an adjustment note, and the government wants us to be able to link to the original invoice that we've done that. So it's only when we're using a credit note in this field, in this object, that we would need an original invoice. So this line here, which is going to be working for all these other invoices, will work sometimes, but not always. So if we were coding this, what we should be doing is checking for that that attribute. So what we can do is we can use the Python function to check for an attribute, and we're going to see if IV, our invoice, has got an attribute called original invoice. And if it has, then we're going to print out the original invoice. And you see, as soon as I did that, our PyCharm warning went away. Okay, done something wrong there. Alright, so I'll copy that, paste that down here, get rid of this one. So you see how it worked out for the else. We're not checking for the attribute, so it's still a warning. So it's pretty clever how it analyzes your code for these things. So we just want to print out the invoice in those cases. So let me know if I'm going too fast for you, or if this is not making sense. Okay, let's go through a few of these things. All right, I'm quickly going to trim these. I must have set it differently in the other PyCharm I had. Set it for a longer line length, but it now wants to be 120 characters, so I'll just shorten these lines. To get rid of the errors. You see all the long lines have got these underlines on them. So that was pretty clever then. I just put a return in the middle of a string, and it terminated the string, put a continuation character, and then the string on the next line. Okay. What's this warning here? It's warning us that the PEP 8, which is the guidelines on how to format your code to make it look nice in Python, is expecting 2 blank lines before a function, and we've only put 1 in. Now, I used to laugh when I saw these things come up, but I've started following them, and it does actually make my code look a bit neater. So I'm happy to do that now. All right. Shadows name num from outer scope. So I've used a variable here called num, and in my code at the module level I've also used a variable called num. So when you've got 2 places using the same variable name, it's a common programming error is you think that you're actually using the same variable. So PyCharm tries to get you to use different names when one scope is inside the other for this, and that's a really good idea. So I might leave the one here inside the function correct, and I'll go and change the one that's outside. And here we go. I've set it up as a to-do. Rename num to numerals. Okay, so Leo's just asked, what conditions does a continuation character work? So what that continuation character is doing, it's a backslash, is escaping the end of line character. So anytime you've got an end of line and you put a backslash in front of it as the last character on the string, last character on the line, it'll assume that the end of line is not an end of line. So that will always work. Probably not inside a string, except inside a string. So we've started a string here with single quotes. Like I can try that. Yeah, it even works inside the string, but it looks pretty ugly. So and the other thing is when you do a new line inside a string, it has to go right to the beginning of the line, even if this line was indented. So it's by putting the quotes in as they've done it automatically, they're able to just line these up here and make it read a lot better. Now, if you have a function that you're calling, so you've opened a parentheses, left parentheses here, then you can press return and put in other things. So you could put in your separator equals a space or whatever, and that's fine. It knows that because it hadn't got to a right parentheses, it knows you haven't finished. In this case, it got to a double quote. It thinks you possibly could have finished. It doesn't know, so in that case we have to escape the new line character. But if you're doing this where you've got the parentheses, other things like if you're at a list, you can put in a new line in your list, and because it hasn't got to the right square bracket, it will let you have a new line in the middle of your line of code. Similarly, dictionaries, you can have new lines inside of them, tuples, and function arguments. So you can see in this comment here, I've put the word to do here, and it's gone into this bright yellow. So it's really good if you're writing some code and you think, oh, I better get back and do something, fix that other bit up. So you put to do in there, and then it goes yellow in the code. We get a nice blue marker over here on the right, which says to do, rename num to numerals. We can also go down to our tab down here, which is to do, and it found to do items in 2 files, and we can click on that and it'll just take us straight to that to do. So that's good. What we're going to do is we're going to rename num to numerals. Now this is one of the fantastic things I love about IDEs, is it allows you to refactor things. So I right click on that and say refactor, which is going to be rename, and I'm going to change num to numerals. That'll do. Refactor, I can hit preview and it'll tell me every change that it's going to make. I can even search in comments and strings, and it's changed all of these ones in the global scope with one key press to numerals, but it didn't change the num that we were using up here in our function, which is in a local scope. And so now we no longer have an error there or a warning saying we're shadowing a name from the global scope in this local scope. Okay, so Leo's asked, when I do a file name as a string, I need / as in d : // Is that continuation of escape? So yeah, / means escape. And so, \n is a new line, /r is a carriage return, /t is a tab. So you're escaping the letter from its, you're escaping the next character from its normal use and giving it a different use. So / and a new line is saying don't use it as a new line, just in fact ignore it totally. Now / is saying is escaping the the second / from its normal use, which is the escape character. So by putting the double / in there, you are getting a just a normal /. That's how you return to that functionality of /. I find that really, really confusing and really hard to read, as I've got to count how many backslashes. Like if I have to do a double /, then I've got to type in 4 of them if I want 2 backslashes. So I really recommend, if you've ever got a / in a string that you want to be as a /, then you do it as a raw string. So you put an R outside the quotes, and then you can put your / in without a problem. So like if I had a / there, I'd have to do 2 backslashes to make it a single / in what I'm trying to get, which is in your case d : /. But if I put an R in front, then they just / act like normal backslashes. and so that's what I would recommend. Now, if you'll notice here, this I reckon is a bug in Python, but it's been there for several versions. If the last character of a raw string is a backslash, then you will mark as a it'll escape the double quote. I don't know when you'd want to do that, but so yes, you have to either put a space in there or something. You just can't have in a raw string you can't have the last character as being a backslash. I guess it's because you might want to do that. Yeah, so that's when it works. All right. For people who are using Visual Studio Code, did anyone work out how to use the debugger on that? So let's change spaces, this tab to space, and save. That's right. So I don't like Visual Studio Code as much. It's not as quick to pick up these changes that I've made. Let's try running it. Okay, so now we want to run it, and let's try running it. Positional argument. Oh yeah, we've got to fix all those errors. Let's just grab all the code that we've already fixed in PyCharm and put it into Visual Studio. And try running that. That's good. So that's running the first bit of it. Okay. Now if we want to increase the logging level in Visual Studio Code, we have to add a configuration. So it's similar wording. So there's the configuration. So that's your standard configuration, and we want to do a new one. Where do we do that? Run, add configuration, Python. So let's put the normal one, the default one in there, and let's do debug logging. And after program here, we can put in our arguments. And a comma. Okay. And we go to this tab here, which is the run, and we can select which one we want to use. So we have to save this before we can use it. So you can see there's a dot in there. With debug logging, and run that. Python. I'm going to try just the normal one. That's running it in Bash. Nope, I've done something wrong in that. But anyway, that's the idea of what we're trying to do. That looks all right. and you can see it put the -- log debug on there properly, but I'm not exactly sure why it's having this problem. But any experts out there on Visual Studio Code, feel free to send me some advice. All right, how are we going? We're almost got through these. Okay, so I've used a doc string here with a single double quotes, and it suggests triple double quotes. So let's try that. Missing white space. Yep, got a bit of white space after there. Okay, here it's found in my code. I haven't used this variable at all, string amount, and that's true. I've haven't used it, so I can just delete that line. Multiple spaces after operator. I like them lined up, but anyway, pep8 likes them the same number of spaces, so we'll go with them. Parameter date document not used. Now that's pretty important. I've set up this constructor here, and I should use date document somewhere, and I should have passed it through to this one. I've forgotten, so I better put that in. Date document. And here's a really bad error. I've called my variable name list, so I've wiped over the function list that's built into Python. So I really don't want to do that. It can cause really sorts of bad problems. So I'm going to rename that one. I'll use the refactoring or just renaming. So Shift F6, and maybe I'll just get rid of the I in that and refactor it. And so it's just changed it in both places. And so now I'm back down to no problems. Now there was one problem in there that I've deliberately put in that it hasn't found yet, and that's this one here, incompatible with early Python version 3.7. So I put a line of code in there that doesn't work with 3.7. So in the settings for PyCharm, we can say what we want to do when it does its inspections, and one of the things we want to do is a code compatibility inspection. So we want to make sure our code is compatible with Python 3.7. This inspector is turned off for the moment, so I'm going to turn it on. I don't need to be compatible with 2.7, but I want it to be compatible with everything back to 3.7 because a lot of you guys are running Python 3.7. So if I click OK for that, and now if I look here, Python 3.7 does not support equality signs in f strings, and that's this line here. So that's a problem that I've put the variable, and I've put an equal. So what that does in Python 3.8 is it shows number name numerals equals and then the value of number name numerals. But I'm going to change it to what I've done for all the other places, and that'll get rid of that problem. Okay, here we go. So this got renamed from that global variable. So where we had the variable with the wrong name, that's what was causing this error here. So now if I put it back to list, that fixes it. So you can see how bad it was to override list with a variable as a variable name, because then it just totally confused us on this line here. I really couldn't understand the error message at all. Okay, so Howard said, and I'll bring this one across so we can all read it. He's hung up on the F string number name num equals syntax error. Yes, so that's exactly what I've been saying. Python 3.7 doesn't support this line, so I'm using Python 3.9, so that will work. But if you see the change that I've just made, all you have to do is delete that equals sign, this equals sign here, delete that, and your code will work. But I'd also recommend upgrading to the latest version of Python because it's got new stuff in it, and it's can be really useful. Okay, not sure what Leo's going there with thunderclaps, but all right, how are we going? We're getting pretty close to finishing this. All right, it's worked out. I've used a wrong attribute here, and it's only just worked it out now because I've fixed up that typing. I've fixed up that other error, so you see one error can lead to another. And now it's worked out that I've used the wrong name here, and AUD unit price is not an attribute of item, but I can use command completion, which was just control space, and it's put in the correct value for me. Okay, save that. So we've fixed all the errors. We've got the nice tick up here. What have I got down here? I've got a to do, so let's just change that to done. And see the yellow's gone away. And what's this? Oh, that's a breakpoint. So we've set a breakpoint here. So are there any questions that we have on that? Did anyone manage to get debugging working on Visual Studio Code? So the one last thing we can do, we've made all these changes. Let's one thing I like to do in PyCharm is if I want to compare two different files, I can select the two files and say compare, and it gives me a list of all the changes that I've made. And you can even copy one change from like I could copy from left to right if I wanted to, or from right to left. So these are the fixed ones on the left, and I can go down change by change and see what I've changed, why I've had to make those changes. So there's that logic problem. I had the missing a space in the code, unusable code, unreachable code. So there you can see exactly what changes I've made, especially if you can't remember what they were. So I think that's like a really, really useful view. Let's just have one more look at Visual Studio Code. All right, so I'm just running debugging now without the I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to set a breakpoint in here. So let's just put a breakpoint. So the breakpoints work very similarly. You just click in the left margin here. They even use similar colors. And then we go run start debugging. It gets to the point, And in here you can see all the variables as well, and you can even put watch variables down below. We've got step over, step into, step out of. So let's just step over. And this one, so we've got 345. Let's step into that and see what it looks like. Here we've got our call stack. We can see the main module is called number name, and in number name we've got a single variable at the moment called number, which is 345, and in the main module we've got all our globals that are sitting there. And so as we loop down, we can see we've got the trillion, billion, million, and I went a bit too fast for it, so I'm back to trillions again. So as you can see, I'm now in this one. I got down to 100, and on the call stack, it then called this number name, and it's just using the number 3, and it's trying to convert that to a name. So I can just set a breakpoint here and run up into that breakpoint. It'll save me looping through all of those, turn it off, and just keep stepping over. All right, so that's the end of my session. The next 2 weeks we're going to have Arun's going to be doing machine learning, so hopefully that'll be good, and then the week after that is going to be another absolute beginners session. So I hope you learned something from this, and I hope you really appreciate some of the tools that are available in these IDEs these days, because they're so much more powerful than they used to be, and they really are invaluable in the assistance that they give to when you're programming. Yeah, I've got my 100 subscribers now on YouTube, so I'll be setting up a new name soon for that channel. And I hope you can keep watching. There's nothing on YouTube. YouTube chat, there's nothing there. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in about 3 weeks' time.